Haram love. This is a story of an unacceptable or forbidden love affair resulting from racist motives between a white Sudanese Arab girl and a black African Zanji boy from South Sudan. It was written in English and translated into Arabic by Dr. A. Ahmed. Copyright. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author except by a reviewer, who may cite brief passages from the review for printing in a general magazine, a school journal, or a university article. All characters in this novel are fictitious and any resemblance to real people, living or dead, is purely coincidental. Chapter 31. The final ruling of the Khartoum Criminal Court in the case of Insaf. The criminal court's ruling on the suspected Arab girl, Insaf Salah al-Junaid, was supposed to be announced a week after the third and final session, but it was postponed indefinitely because the judge and lawyer were subjected to severe attack due to their public and bold challenges to the Minister of Religious Affairs and Endowments. For 3 months, a panel of judges and lawyers fought against the Minister of Religious Affairs and the Sudanese government. The government demanded that the judge and lawyer be replaced and forced into early retirement. They should be convicted of publicly insulting and defying Maulana Syed Ali Muhammad Ahmad, Minister of Religious Affairs. The lawyer Siham Khalil must be punished, especially because she exposed her private parts in front of the honorable minister and the public. That's when she took off her Sudanese sari top and exposed the private parts of her thighs, hips, and half of her breasts. She caused large numbers of Muslim men and young men to commit adultery because Islam says that the first look is for a woman who is unveiled for you, and the second look is for her private parts against you. Despite all this, the body of judges and lawyers collectively threatened the Muslim Brotherhood government to resign from their positions if the judge and lawyer were convicted, punished, removed, and the trial sessions were repeated. The conflict could have continued forever if a compromise had not been reached. The solution was bargaining, which forced the judge and the lawyer to apologize to the honorable minister, Mr. Ali Muhammad Ahmed. Therefore, both apologies must be expressed in writing and received in person. Once His Honor received 2 short letters from the dissenters, the court was given permission to announce its final verdict. The government prohibited any publicity or public gathering inside the criminal courtroom. The court was held secretly in a small room. Only the judge, jury members, the public prosecutor, and the lawyer Siham Khalil were allowed to attend the court. In addition, the suspected Arab girl, Insaf Salah al-Junaid, 4 female guards, 2 policewomen and 4 policemen were added to the number an hour later. They were all armed to the teeth as if they had come to engage in a deadly battle with a ferocious enemy. This last session began at 10:30 p.m. on Sunday, a working day. The lawyer had received short notice regarding the place and time of the court session. She did not have enough time to ask the African lover, Deng, to come and accompany her to the courtroom. She called him to the university residence and informed him of the secret trial. Deng arrived at the court building 20 minutes after the arrival of the lawyer he appointed to defend his Arab girlfriend. He was refused entry by armed guards. The courtroom is heavily guarded from the outside. Deng stood outside and waited impatiently for his friend's lawyer to come out and inform him of the final court ruling. Inside the courtroom, the suspected girl, Insaf Salah al-Junaid, was handcuffed, legs shackled, and surrounded by 4 large female guards. She was wearing once again the scandalous dress that the evil pimp Haja Shaza forced her to wear when she kidnapped her from the house of Haj Abdullah. It was revealing her thighs, hips, half of her breasts, and big ass. The 6 police officers are spread out in different corners of the small room. The judge and 4 jurors sat in chairs behind a long table. The lawyer Siham Khalil and the public prosecutor only occupied the audience section. As soon as the suspect Insaf entered the courtroom, the judge himself announced the court's final ruling. The judge said loudly, "In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, and prayers and peace be upon the most honorable of all messengers and prophets, our Master Muhammad." After hearing the charges against the accused girl, Insaf Salah al-Junaid, the statements of the court prosecutor, Mr. Saif al-Islam Nasser al-Din, and the three-day arguments of the defense lawyer, Ms. Siham Khalil. This court reached the following rulings. Did the southern boy, Dangmajak Nasser, commit adultery with the northern girl, Insaf, and impregnate her illegally? This court rejected the above charge and acquitted the girl accused of fairness of this false charge. Is the accused Insaf guilty of giving birth to an illegitimate child and killing him? This court did not find the girl suspected guilty of these two punishable offenses. Is the accused girl Insaf guilty of killing her husband, Haj Taha, on their first wedding night? This court ruled that the death of Haj Taha was accidental and not motivated by premeditation. Therefore, the court did not find the suspected girl guilty of killing her Muslim husband, Haj Taha. Is the suspected girl, Insaf, guilty of stealing the jewelry of the Samir Wad Masood family in Port Sudan? This court did not find the suspected girl guilty of stealing Samir's family jewelry. Is the suspected girl, Insaf, guilty of killing her roommate, Badriya Adarub? This court dropped the charge of killing Badriya against the accused, Insaf Sulla al-Junaid. Is the suspected girl, Insaf, guilty of practicing disguised prostitution while living in the apartment with Badriya Adarub? This court was unable to find proof or evidence that the suspect, Insaf, was indulging in disguised prostitution activities while living with her friend, the late teenage girl, Badriya Adarub. Is the accused, Insaf, guilty of stealing the church's savings while she was at the home of Pastor Gurgis Hanna? This court dropped the theft charge against the accused, Insaf Sulla al-Junaid, due to lack of evidence. Is the accused, Insaf, guilty of exposing her naked body in front of the Saudi man, Sheikh Abdo? Based on the nude photos provided by the police authority, this court convicted the suspected girl of exposing her private parts in front of a Saudi man who is not her husband. This court also concluded, through her naked photos, that the suspected girl, Insaf, had sex with the Saudi man, Sheikh Abdo, because the legal text says the evidence goes to whoever is alleged, and here the evidence is available. During her illegal seclusion with a strange man, the suspected girl is therefore guilty of practicing prostitution. Is the accused, Insaf, guilty of killing the woman pimp, Shaza Hassan, known as Haja Shada? This court does not believe that the lawyer Siham Khalil's defense is sufficient to justify the defendant Insaf's claim that she killed Haja Shada in defense of her honor against forced sex or forced prostitution. The following reasons made the members of this court reject such a false claim to justify murder. The suspected girl deliberately wore an immoral dress that revealed her private parts, intending to seduce her viewers, especially the rich Arab man, Sheikh Abdo. 1. The suspected teenage girl, of her own free will, accompanied Haja Shaza from Haj Abdullah's house to her palace. 2. The accused then exposed her entire sexy, naked body to the wealthy old Saudi man, Sheikh Abdo. 3. Therefore, she deliberately seduced him sexually and committed adultery with him to earn illicit money through prostitution. 4. The Saudi man Sheikh Abdo paid a generous sum of money to the woman pimp, Haja Shada, and the suspected prostitute, Insaf. The police found the check inside the pocket of the murdered woman, which bore his and her names. This was the price for the illegal sexual nudity and adultery he committed with the suspected girl, Insaf. Based on the above-mentioned evidence, this court rejected the defendant Insaf Sulla al-Junaid's claim that the pimp, Haja Shada, had kidnapped her, detained her, and wanted to force her to have sex with police officer Yasser Talha as a sexual bribe to cover up and prevent her from being arrested and thrown in prison to face the consequences of her other crimes. Moreover, this court rejects the accusation that police officer Yasser Talha phoned Haja Shah and convinced her to detain the suspected girl in her home until he came and blackmailed her into having sex with him. Before announcing his ruling on the final charge, the judge paused for a moment and looked around. He seemed to want to make sure everything was perfect for his final verdict. Then he cleared his throat and said in a loud voice, accordingly, this court issued a death sentence by hanging to the girl, Insaf Sulla al-Junaid, for the crime of killing the pimp, Haja Shada, due to a dispute over the division of illicit money earned through whoredom. The court is over. Chapter 32. Public protest by citizens of the capital city. The legal representative Siham Khalil did not expect the death sentence to be issued against her defendant, the accused girl, Insaf Salah al-Junaid. She prepared herself to accept any prison sentence or corporal punishment for her client except physical annihilation. Therefore, the court's final verdict to impose the death penalty hit her like a severe heart attack. She knelt down on the ground and began to cry. Her sympathy for Insaf moved her heart against the judge. Then she expressed her dissatisfaction with strong words. "Your final verdict is a terrible crime in itself. God will never forgive the court for convicting such an innocent girl. You have condemned every woman in Sudan. You have given men the right to enslave and abuse women in this country forever." The judge and jurymen did not wait for the angry lawyer to finish her words of protest. They immediately got up and left the court. Four policemen escorted them out of the courtroom. Insaf was forcefully dragged out of the courtroom by 4 massive female guards and 2 armed policewomen. She screams and struggles to free herself from the 4 female guards. After a short while, the courtroom was empty except for the lawyer Siham, who was screaming, wailing, and denouncing the court's death penalty on her defendant. She started slapping her face and pulling her hair. The African lover Dang ran into the courtroom. The sight of the crying lawyer confirmed his fear. He had already seen his Arab lover, Insaf, the convict, being forcefully dragged out of the courtroom by 4 huge female guards and violently pushed into a police vehicle fortified with a guardrail as if it were a monster vehicle. He saw her tears and heard her pleading for rescue and freedom. At first, he ran towards the police wagon, but the huge policewomen prevented him from reaching it and stopped him by force. He tried to hold on to the iron bars, but the car moved quickly and sped away from him. He fell hard on his back and hit the ground. He cut his forehead until blood flowed from it like hot acid. However, he got back to his feet and chased the police vehicle for some time. Finally, the injured African lover, Dang, abandoned his failed attempt to save his beloved Arab girl, Insaf, and rushed into the courtroom. He knelt next to the lawyer Siham, still crying bitterly for his unjustly condemned Arab friend. Likewise, the court's decision to hang the convicted Arab girl to death was shocking news to the public. Khartoum local radio announced the decision at exactly 11:30 at night, and the next morning it was published by all local newspapers. The newspapers reported that the court acquitted Insaf of all charges except for the 2 charges of adultery with the Saudi Sheikh Abdo and the killing of the Sudanese pimp, Haja Shah Hassan. The newspapers did not explain how the criminal court reached this decision, which seems unpleasant to many people. Despite the unjust final ruling issued by the court, most of the people of Khartoum have already accepted the lawyer Siham Khalil's justifications for the killing of the Arab girl Insaf Salah al-Junaid the pimp, Haja Shah. Accordingly, there is a public outcry against the court's decision. Inside and outside the Triangle capital city, people disagreed with the final ruling issued by the criminal court. Only some Islamic groups such as Ansar al-Sunnah, the Muslim Brotherhood, and their women's branch called the Nasiba Sisters accepted it. The Sudanese Women's Rights Union led a march to the public palace and submitted a protest note to the President of Sudan. Many high school and university students joined this protest. The public protests and demonstrations continued for a week. Meanwhile, the lawyer Siham Khalil wrote a long letter of appeal and sent copies of it to the Supreme Court, the Sharia Court, the body of judges and lawyers, Human Rights Watch, the Sudanese Women's Rights Union, and the President of the Democratic Republic of Sudan. The death sentence of the condemned Arab girl, Insaf Salah al-Junaid, 18 years old, is scheduled to be executed a week after the criminal court announced its final ruling. The lawyer Siham tried to challenge her client's age because she is a minor girl and Sudanese law does not allow the execution of a minor convict, but her appeal was rejected because Insaf was 18 years old when she killed the pimp Haja Shah. The court ruled that the death sentence must be conducted next Friday afternoon in Cooper Central Prison. The convicted girl must be hanged to death inside the prison building. The prison administration announced through the media that the public would not be allowed to watch the execution. When less than 24 hours remained until the execution of the Arab girl sentenced to death, it happened that on Thursday afternoon, the Sudanese Women's Rights Union delivered its memorandum to the Sudanese president who took power through a military coup on June 30, 1989. On the morning of that same day, a large crowd of members of the Women's Rights Union, human rights activists, male and female university students, male and female school students, employees, and workers gathered in the palace's public garden. They surrounded Mr. President's office from morning until afternoon. At 4:30 p.m., His Excellency the President left his office and personally received the protest note. He immediately got into his car and headed to his residence at the military headquarters within the general command of the Sudanese army. As soon as the president left the presidential palace under heavy guard, the police, rapid support forces, and army armed forces dispersed the gathering using tear gas and long police batons. They even used live bullets and shot some demonstrators to death in the palace courtyards. These dead protesters were considered by the people as martyrs of freedom and the struggle for justice. At 10:30 p.m. the same night, radio and television programs were interrupted to broadcast Mr. President's message live. For an hour, all radio stations and television channels broadcast national anthems and military marches. They also played recitations of verses and surahs of the Holy Quran with the voice of the famous Al-Azhari reciter Omar Ahmed. At exactly 11 o'clock at night, His Highness the President appeared in front of the cameras and addressed the public regarding the case of conviction for the death of the 18-year-old Arab girl, Insaf Salah al-Junaid. Mr. President reads his brief speech to the Sudanese nation from a white paper placed in front of him. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. In the name of the noble messenger, who is the seal of all prophets and messengers of Allah our Master and Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Today, in my office, many women, male and female students, employees, and workers gathered inside the garden of the Republican Palace and submitted a request for pardon regarding a young Sudanese woman who was convicted by the criminal court of premeditated murder. I admit that due to my busy schedule, I did not hear about this young Arab woman accused until today. When I read the text of the petition for her clemency, I asked my secretary to request a transcript of the trial of the woman in question. At approximately 6 p.m., I received a transcript of the trial and final court decision sentencing her to death. I searched the files carefully and with great precision and read the list of charges brought against her by the Khartoum, Port Sudan, and Gadaref police authorities and the public prosecutor's request to convict her and the defense of her lawyer Siham Khalil. I did not find the Triangle Criminal Court's decision to be biased or unfair in any way. But after reviewing the merits of the defense presented by her lawyer during 3 consecutive sessions, I found that the accused girl should be blamed in some cases, and we should pity her in others. Based on this, I decided to grant the girl sentence to death by hanging a presidential pardon in the hope that she would improve her situation. I take this opportunity and ask all our Muslim women and girls to follow the teachings of our tolerant Islamic religion. I discovered that the problem of this young convict began when she disobeyed her parents and fell in love with a man before marriage, so I asked all our Muslim women and even our Christian biblical sisters to obey their parents, their husbands, and their religion. I repeat once again, I grant the Sudanese girl who was handed a death by hanging, Insaf Salah al-Junaid, a full presidential pardon. Therefore, she must be released tomorrow morning from the women's prison in Khartoum and go to her family free girl. But I say to her and other sinners, as our noble messenger said to the infidels of Mecca when he released them, go, you are free, but if you return to your crimes, we will return to you with retaliation. At the end I ask God Almighty and our noble prophet to bless our great Sudanese nation. He protects our free women from the machinations of evil people and from following in the steps of the accursed Satan, for he has been a clear enemy of mankind. Chapter 33. The reunion of 2 eternal lovers wrongfully separated. The Arab girl condemned to death, Insaf, spent many horrifying days and frightful nights locked in her terrifying cell. She had been imprisoned in her isolation cell for more than 6 months, but she felt like she had been thrown into the bottomless pit for 6 lean years. But since the day she heard that she was sentenced to death by hanging, she has not been able to sleep for even 2 hours straight. She knew and understood that she did not kill anyone except the pimp woman who tried to turn her into a kidnapped sex slave and locked her in her home to satisfy her greed for wealth by selling her young body to men, taking her virginity, and desecrating her purity. Therefore, Insaf was surprised when she heard the death sentence against her. Since then, she has refused to eat food or drink water except by force. Every day, some violent guards forced a little food and a few drops of water into her dry mouth and empty stomach. They want to keep her alive for 7 days until the day she is hanged to death inside Cooper Central Prison. They don't want to be responsible for starving her to death. During her prolonged period of imprisonment, Insaf lost a lot of weight. Her face became pale, losing half of its beauty, and her body was robbed of its femininity and sexual appeal. She has not been able to wash her body and comb her hair since the day she was sentenced to death. After her condemnation, no one is allowed to visit her. Her African lover, Deng, came several times, but was always sent back without seeing her. He also did not eat any food or drink any water during those terrifying days. He was constantly crying over the loss of his beloved Arab friend, Insaf. During those months of inquiries, trials, and court sessions, his love for her was revived and strengthened. He visited her regularly in the women's prison. He provided her with all her necessary needs. He sold his car to cover her lawyer's fees and bought everything she needed, including clothes, shoes, soap, brushes, and paste. He also traveled with the lawyer Siham Khalil to the cities of Gadaref and Port Sudan and paid all the costs of their trips together. Insaf also lived in the hope of proving her innocence so that she could be united with her first lover, Deng, as husband and wife. She thought that God had thwarted her 2 love affairs with the rich Arab Muslim boy Samir and the Coptic Christian boy William because he wanted to marry her to her first African lover, Deng. Despite her displacement in Port Sudan and Khartoum, the Arab lover, Insaf, maintained her purity and virginity for him and him alone. Even the Muslim boy Deng believed that God prevented him from marrying the African Christian girl Susan because he wanted to marry his Arab Muslim lover, Insaf. With this beautiful hope, the 2 eternal lovers waited for the end of the long trial. Then finally came the fateful night, the day of the death sentence, which shattered their dreams and separated them, it seemed, forever. When Mr. President granted a pardon to the girl condemned to death, none of the lovers knew about it. That night, a few hours before the execution, Deng left his room in the university hostel and went to sit on the riverbank. He decided never to return to his room until the soul of his beloved girlfriend left this evil world. He tried hard not to imagine the noose pressing down on the neck of his delicate Arab lover and snatching her honorable soul from her sacred body. He cried bitterly when he imagined such a cruel sight and inhuman death of the only girl he had ever loved in his life. He completely believes in her innocence, purity, virginity, and courage, and in killing the lady pimp who wanted to strip her of her honor. She is the only Arab girl who loves him and does not discriminate against his African race, and does not view him as a black-faced Negro slave. While her beloved friend Deng was sitting on the riverbank and mourning the fateful end of his beloved friend Insaf, 2 huge armed female guards came to the cell of the girl condemned to death by hanging. When Insaf saw them, she started crying loudly and begged them not to take her to the gallows. She told them that she was just a teenage girl and that she had done nothing wrong to deserve to be executed at such an early age. She thought they were here to take her to be executed in the notorious Cooper prison, where many innocent men and women were hanged. She grabbed the iron bars of the door and tried to prevent them from entering her cell, which looked like a cave or a grave. Then the 2 huge female guards took her out the door and shouted good news into her ears, but she did not hear their words. They forcefully dragged her to their office like a sheep is dragged to the slaughterhouse to be slaughtered. While she was screaming and begging for mercy, one of the guards put her big hand on Insaf's mouth and screamed, "Listen, you damned criminal girl sentenced to death by hanging, you have obtained a presidential pardon. You will not be hanged to death today or any other day. You are free now and can go home." The guard repeated those words many times before the girl, who was spared from execution, heard them and understood their meaning. "You can go now. You are free like a bird, let out of the iron cage," the same policewoman shouted. Insaf looked at her suspiciously. "Yes, you are a free prisoner. You can go now," said the other guard. "Where should I go, ma'am?" the freed girl Insaf asked innocently. "Go to hell, you damned murderous whore, if you are still homeless and without a place and your family disowns you and does not want you." Finally, the freed prisoner understood what the two guards said, so she turned her back, pulled her legs, and left the office. Insaf walked aimlessly inside the prison building. She could not believe that she was free, like a bird in the sky. She looked at her hands and feet. Her tear-filled eyes could no longer see or feel the long, heavy chains and shackles. Another guard saw her wandering aimlessly inside the accursed prison building, then directed her towards the exit. The freed Arab girl left the women's prison and entered one of the crowded streets of Khartoum. There is no lover or enemy there waiting to receive her or kill her, or anyone close to her Arab family who recognizes her. She wondered what happened to her dear African friend, Deng. The Arab friend Insaf, who was released from death sentence, does not know where her African lover lives. She has no idea how to get to the house of Hajj Abdullah, who pulled her out of the filthy garbage container. She walked a few steps and lost her way. She is hungry, tired, thirsty, and very weak. She started to feel dizzy. She struggled to stay on her feet, but her best efforts could not stop her body from falling. The freed prisoner lost consciousness, and her unconscious body collapsed into the street crowded with cars, people, and animals. She fell into a dark, endless pit, just as happened the day she escaped from the murdered body of her friend Badria. Meanwhile, her African lover, Deng, left the riverbank, his eyes blinded by tears and his heart full of deep sorrow. Then he went to the women's prison to demand the body of his beloved Arab friend, Insaf, who was executed by hanging. He wants to give her a proper burial because her Arab family seems to have rejected and abandoned her and considered her a fallen, dead girl. He decided to bury her in one of the Islamic cemeteries in Khartoum instead of leaving her murdered body to the prison authority to bury it somewhere inside the prison cemetery, throw it in a hole elsewhere in the wilderness, or burn it into ashes like the corpse of a wild animal. Upon his arrival at the prison jailer's office, he was informed of the presidential pardon and conditional release of his convicted girlfriend. The African lover Deng becomes incredibly happy when he learns that his beloved Arab girlfriend, Insaf, has been granted a presidential pardon and has been released from her cell and is now at large somewhere outside the women's prison. He left prison and searched everywhere for her, but did not find her. Finally, he went to the house of the good Muslim man, Hajj Abdullah. He knew his home address because he went there before the trial with the lawyer Siham Khalil. Hajj Abdullah and his family had already learned the good news through the speech the president delivered at night. The Hajj accompanied the lover in his search until they finally found the freed prisoner unconscious in Omdurman Hospital. What happened to her unconscious body was the same thing that happened to her on the day she escaped from the body of Badria, who was killed in an honor killing by her brother. But the difference this time was that some people called the police, and she was transported in an ambulance to the emergency department. When the Arab lover, Insaf, opened her eyes that evening, the first person she saw was her African lover, Deng. It is difficult to describe their second meeting and reunion outside the prison in human terms. It is a reunion of two souls and two bodies brought together by a strong, sincere, and true love that cannot be described in words. She also saw Hajj Abdullah and his family surrounding her bed in the hospital where she was once admitted and stayed without a visitor. Everyone shed tears of joy, sadness, and mixed emotions that everyone embraced her for a long time and cried with her. On the same day, Insaf was discharged from Omdurman General Hospital, which is the dirtiest and worst hospital in the world. When she entered Hajj Abdullah's house, she jumped over a slaughtered sheep that the honorable family had given her as offering, thanking God for saving her from the gallows. The Arab family, which was reunited with the African boy Deng, celebrated the divine mercy on the honorable and chaste Arab girl, Insaf. They ate food, drank juices, and talked until late into the night. When the next day's sun rose over the house, the two eternal lovers, the African boy and the Arab girl, became officially engaged to each other. 2 weeks later, the good Muslim man, Hajj Abdullah, accompanied the African friend, Deng Majak Nasser, to the mosque and performed his permissible Islamic marriage to his Arab friend, Insaf Sulla al-Junaid, in accordance with the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad. Chapter 34. The sad honeymoon of the Arab bride and the African groom. Since the day they were torn apart racially and mercilessly in the city of Gedaref at the hands of the cruel Arab father Sulla al-Junaid, called Abu Shanab, the two intimate lovers, Insaf and Deng, were not alone together until the day they were reunited in halal Islamic marriage. On the same day, the newlyweds left Hajj Abdullah's house in the evening and headed towards a small hotel nearby. They decided to spend a few days and enjoy their honeymoon there. After that, they planned to rent a small, cheap place and live as a legitimate Muslim husband and his legitimate Muslim wife. The handsome African groom decided to postpone his medical studies and find a job to support his beautiful Arab bride. As the taxi drove along the river shore, the beauty of the Nile River inspired the newly married lovers with joy and happiness, filling their hearts with noble and indescribable feelings. They are completely occupied looking into each other's eyes. They want to dissolve into one soul and become one body. Deng and Insaf long for the taxi to grow wings and become like a carpet of wind for the lover Aladdin and his beloved Badr al-Badr and fly them to the hotel where the real fun of their honeymoon will begin. They want to eat from the tree of paradise and taste the apple fruit that they were deprived of as a result of their so-called forbidden love. Finally, they broke both ethnic and racial barriers and became a Muslim couple after they were unmarriageable lovers. They long to be alone in one hotel room, even for one night in their lives. The African groom's hands are busy touching his Arab bride's smooth cheeks, her long black hair, and her beautiful lips. Several times, their strong love led them to embrace and kiss each other. Whenever they do this, they remind themselves that they are still in a public place. They know that it is against the law of etiquette to hug and kiss in a public place, even for married lovers. So, they waited impatiently in each other's arms until the taxi driver arrived at their final destination and dropped them off in front of the small hotel. The beautiful bride, Insaf, and the handsome groom, Deng, followed her into the hotel, full of joy. They knew that the peak of honeymoon fun would begin in a few moments, and then they would live happily ever after, with nothing to separate them. They had already planned what to do during their honeymoon. They want to spend 7 days at the hotel in Khartoum. The groom promised his bride to take her on a sightseeing tour around the capital city. On the 8th day, they will travel by express bus to the city of Gedaref to visit their old friends and see the places where they used to meet each other on the side of the road while going back and forth from their schools for boys and girls. From Gedaref, they will travel by train of Wari to Port Sudan City and spend some time with Officer Khalid's family. The runaway Arab girl, Insaf, wants to return to Aunt Khadija, Sister Salwa, and police officer Khalid Yahya. She wants to apologize to them for the disaster and scandal that she caused them on the day of her engagement to the rich young man, Samir Wad Masood. Finally, the couple will return to Khartoum City where they can rent a small nest and live happily ever after. However, as soon as the two newly married lovers, the black African groom Deng and the white Arab bride Insaf, entered the hotel holding hands, they became aware of the many eyes staring at them. The eyes do not show admiration and congratulation, but rather astonishment and anger. The newlyweds ignored the eyes that looked at them as if they were aliens from another planet or two animals that had escaped from their cages in the zoo, and they walked directly to the reception desk and asked to book a room for a week. Yes, John. What do you want? The receptionist asked the African groom, looking at him mockingly. My name is not John. I am Ding Majok Nasser, the groom answered innocently. What do you want, Banjas Ding? We want a double bedroom for 7 days. Sorry, man, we don't allow couples to stay here unless they're married. This is my wife, Insaf. We got married today. You have to prove it to me. You can't walk in here in this hotel with a girl and tell me she's your wife. If you don't believe me, you can ask her. Listen to me, Banjas. I will not book you a room unless you show me your marriage certificate. First of all, my name is not Banjas, nor am I a little boy, so you should talk to me with that name, which in the Dinka language means child. I already told you that my name is Deng Majok Nasser. I don't care if your name is James, Kamas, Juma, Kuku, or Tia. If you can't produce your marriage certificate, get the hell out of here before I call the security guards and kick you out in an undignified manner. I want you to show me any couple who booked here and showed their marriage certificate before you welcome them as guests at this hotel. This is a completely different matter. You're a Southerner, and this girl is a Northerner. In other words, you are a Negro, and she is an Arab. Your marriage, if it is valid at all, I have every reason to doubt the legitimacy of your doubtful relationship. Do you want to tell me that there is a law in this country that prevents a Southern African boy from marrying a Northern Arab girl? I did not say there was such a law, but I have never seen a white Arab girl in my life marry a black Negro like you. We will file a complaint with the principal regarding your disgusting racist attitude towards our legal Islamic marriage. The manager is not in his office now. Come tomorrow, bring your marriage certificate and meet him. During all this time, the Arab bride Insaf was bowing her head and looking down. She saw the male guests get up from their chairs and come around them while the female guests stayed away. The grooms laughed, mocked, and enjoyed the conversation between the African groom, Ding, and the receptionist, while their brides remained seated in their chairs, whispering racist conversations about the Arab bride, Insaf. Like burning tongues of fire, their eyes searched her body from head to toe as if she were a naked prostitute brought from the street. Some bold Arab women even spat shame from their mouths. The Arab wife, Insaf, felt insulted by their whispers against her and the laughter of their men at her African husband, Deng. Heavy tears forced themselves out of her beautiful eyes. She tried to hide her hurt feelings, but she couldn't. Dang, Insaf shouted angrily as the words came out of her mouth forcefully. Let's go to another hotel. With uncontrollable anger, the African groom reluctantly left the racist receptionist and went out with his Arab bride outside the hotel, not holding hands as they had when they arrived. That night, the newly married lovers, Dang and Insaf, tried their luck at 7 hotels. In each one, they were suspected and questioned about the nature of their marital relationship and challenged to prove it. At 4:30 a.m., the newlywed couple finally lost hope. They hesitated to return to Hajj Abdullah's house at such an early hour on the new day. They asked the 7th taxi driver to take them to the riverbank. With exhausted bodies and broken hearts, the newlywed lovers sat on a bench on the riverbank. The groom, Ding, asked his bride, Insaf, to lie down on the seat and put her head on his lap. Then he took out his coat and covered her body from the frigid river breeze. Fortunately, the newlywed couple's problem was resolved after 3 days when Hajj Abdullah went to the mosque and met the imam who performed their halal Islamic marriage and obtained their legal marriage certificate. During those 3 days of waiting, the Arab bride, Insaf, stayed at the home of Hajj Abdullah and the African groom, Deng, in the boarding dorm of the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Khartoum. On the 4th evening of their wedding day, the couple left Hajj Abdullah's house and went again to look for a hotel. Their official Islamic legal marriage certificate allowed them the possibility of obtaining a modest room with a small bed in a cheap inn called Lakunda Al Shish on the outskirts of the triangular Sudanese capital city. The owner of the motel is a Southern Christian from the Dinka tribe, to which the African groom belongs. This is the reason behind his acceptance of a black Negro husband who married a white Arab bride. Although the African innkeeper or Negro owner allowed them to check in, they felt the strong prejudice of his Arab employees against their marital union, which was rare in the north of the country. Instead of whispering and expressing their love for each other, the couple spent long hours discussing this serious racial problem facing them. They tried hard to find a solution to it. They asked each other how they could walk in the streets while the racist Arabs of the north stared at them. How can they convince anyone who doubts the credibility of their marital relationship? They cannot carry their Islamic marriage certificate and show it to anyone who questions the nature of their marital union. They know without their legal marriage certificate, they will be harassed and ridiculed by everyone. The next morning, the newly married lovers had breakfast at the Lakunda Ai Shish Motel and left. During their honeymoon, they decided to go on a tourist tour to see the beautiful places in the cosmopolitan Sudanese city. To save money, they decided to use local transportation. The first bus they took was very crowded. They had to force their way in. The racist eyes met them like the rays of the sweltering summer sun. The women's racist whispers of the nature of their union entered their ears like hot acid. The lovers stood inside the bus and held the support bars. Some scoundrels have disturbed the beautiful Arab bride in Saf. They touched her big buttocks and groped her high-raised breasts. Her African groom, Ding, was forced to fight with some of these thugs who harassed his lovely life partner. In order to avoid further problems, the couple decided to change the bus. At the next stop, they got off and rested for a while. After their rest time had passed, they boarded another bus, which was less crowded. Unfortunately, the only seats available for them were in front of two drunks sitting behind them. The two drunk men were singing an obscene song when the two lovers, Insaf and Deng, took the front seats. As soon as their eyes saw the newly married couple, their song stopped and instead, they engaged in an intense argument. "What is this?" one of the two drunk Arab men asked. "A white circumcised Arab girl with a black uncircumcised Negro slave?" The other drunkard replied, "Yes, sir," and they were holding hands together as if they were the slave Antar and the Arab Abla. "She's a slutty northern Arab whore that a black southern slave picked up off the street." "You are a stupid, contemptible, worthless bastard," Ding shouted at the drunken Arab perpetrator and got up and challenged him into a fight. Deng continued, "This Arab girl is my halal Muslim wife, and if you call her a whore and a slut again, I will cut out your tongue." "Please, sir, don't bother yourself with what these useless people say. As the saying goes, don't take drunk people for what they say," answered another southern gentleman. These words calmed the righteous husband's anger and made his wife stand up and ask him to leave the bus. Then the newly married couple left the bus with frowning faces and decided to continue their sightseeing tour by taxi. They concluded that using public transportation would always put them in contact with racist Arab people. They took a taxi and traveled to the Chinese Friendship Cinema Hall. They had bought their tickets for the first showing of the day, a popular Hindi film called Kalia. Kalia in the Hindi language means a black person, and the hero of the famous Indian movie was Amitabh Bachchan. Then the couple went to the cafeteria to have soft drinks. Even inside the cafeteria, Sudanese Arab people were teasing them and making fun of their suspicious relationship. When the Indian film, which they did not like because its events revolved around the real-life story of a notorious black Christian Indian gang leader named Anthony Kalia, ended, the couple wondered where to go next. They wished they could go somewhere where people couldn't harass them with sarcastic remarks and racist insults. Then the African groom, Deng, left his Arab bride, Insaf, standing alone in front of the Friendship Hall and went to buy some sandwiches for their meals. While the Arab bride Insaf was waiting, an old man approached her and greeted her very politely. "How are you, my little daughter?" asked the old man. Insaf replied with a smile, "I'm fine, uncle." The old man continued in a louder voice, "My daughter, who is that man who was holding your hand a few minutes ago?" "This is my husband, Ding." "What did you say, my daughter?" "I told you that the man who was holding my hand was my husband, Ding." "That black man is your husband?" "Yes, uncle. We got married a few days ago." "Why did you do that, my daughter? Are there no Arab men in this country, and that is why you married an African man like that black-faced Negro?" The Arab bride Insaf felt extremely insulted by the rude old Arab man. So, she turned her face and walked away from the despicable racist old geezer. However, the old man stood up and continued to stare evenly until he saw Ding joining her. When he saw the black African and the white Arab couple holding hands, he slammed his hands together and rebuked Satan and spat on the earth. After seeing the angry face of his Arab bride, the African groom asked, "What happened to you, my dear?" "Nothing, dear. Let's go back to the hotel. I don't want to go sightseeing anymore. Every man and every woman in the city is disgustingly racist." Chapter 35. The Arab girl Insaf was summoned for a fourth session in court. After their short, sad honeymoon, the two lovers, Ding and Insaf, dropped the idea of traveling together to the cities of Gedaref and Port Sudan as a result of the hateful racist attitudes they faced in their country's capital city. And they expected to go through even worse racist harassment and abuse in eastern Sudan. The newlywed lovers then rented a small, simple hut in a slum area inhabited by poor African Sudanese from South Sudan, the Nuba Mountains, and the Darfur region. Most of them are so-called jingo slaves. The medical student Deng found part-time evening work and continued his studies at the University of Khartoum during the day. It was his Arab wife who insisted on him continuing his studies in medicine. Insaf preferred to be a housewife. Every Thursday evening, Deng takes his beautiful wife Insaf to swim and practice basketball. Insaf is enjoying her new sport and showing substantial progress. When she was living with her Arab family in the city of Gedaref, she was not allowed to practice any kind of sport or play because a Muslim girl is considered an awara woman, and therefore it is not permissible for her to expose her body and play or swim semi-naked like a boy. Therefore, after her marriage to her African friend, Deng, Insaf felt like a bird that had been freed from its iron prison cage. When they finish their sports time in swimming and basketball training, the two lovers will either go to a restaurant in the evening to have dinner or watch a movie at night in one of the cinema halls. They decided to ignore the racist Arabs and enjoy their married life. By then, they had become accustomed to the racist attitudes of the so-called superior race of Sudanese Arabs. Days passed beautifully and wonderfully for the two intimate lovers. One day, Insaf felt dizzy and vomited while exercising. Deng immediately took her to the hospital. The medical examination showed that she was pregnant. This news brought a lot of joy to the happy couple. From that day on, Deng took greater responsibility for household chores. He encouraged his wife to rest and not do any work. Insaf teased her husband by saying that she wished the baby would be born in 2 years so that he would always treat her like a queen. Ding never returned from college or work without bringing fruits or sweets for his pregnant beloved wife, such as apples, pineapples, mangoes, oranges, and baklava sweet, which is called basta in Sudan. Therefore, the beautiful wife, Insaf, protested that her loving husband, Deng, was overfeeding her. In a fleeting period, she gained a lot of weight and regained her beauty and charm. It has been 3 months since the Arab wife became pregnant. During those months, Deng and Insaf became deeply attached to each other, and their love was renewed. The Arab wife rarely leaves their hut. She was never bored and did not miss the outside world. Her loving African husband gives her everything that the outside world has denied her for so long. Her suffering and homelessness in the past are diminished by the joy and happiness of the present and the bright future that has yet to come. She had almost forgotten her sad and abusive past life. One day, when the happy couple had finished lunch, the postman came and handed them a little notice. The notice is very brief, and the only thing they can understand from its wording is that they are being asked to attend a court hearing. This little notice made the happy couple feel as if an angry Muslim terrorist had suddenly dropped a bomb inside their happy nest of home and shattered everything in an instant. They rushed immediately to their lawyer, Siham Khalil, and asked her to decipher the language of the legal memo. The atheist feminist and women's rights activist Siham Khalil also became puzzled by the court's request. Despite this, she assured them that the notice had nothing to do with the accusations against which Insaf had previously been unfairly tried. She guessed it had something to do with their marriage. For example, mistakes in recording their ages, not having enough witnesses to their marriage, wrong addresses, incorrect spelling of their names, and similar other trivial legal problems. In this case, just a 10-minute visit to the marriage registrar can solve the problem. Due to Deng's busy schedule, their lawyer advised the newlywed lovers to wait for the appointed day to go to court together. The explanation and encouragement of the atheist lawyer, Siham Khalil, made the two lovers relax and wait for the upcoming trial day. Since the court hearing was scheduled for a week later, the couple ignored the matter and resumed their daily lives. On the day scheduled for the legal hearing, Deng and Insaf hired a taxi and went to court. Upon their arrival, they were informed that the relevant legal matter they were invited to attend would be dealt with in the Sharia court and not in the criminal court. Accordingly, the couple took another taxi and headed to the Sharia court. The Sharia court holds its sessions in a small room. When Insaf and Deng entered the courtroom, they found a few people. They didn't bother to look at their faces and see if any of them were familiar or not, friend or foe. They occupied the two front seats and waited impatiently for the judge and jurymen to appear. They waited for an hour before they saw three old men entering the small room that looked like a kindergarten tiny room. Each of the three elderly people supports his body with a long stick to prevent himself from falling forward and breaking his skull. The three are wearing white pajamas called gabaliyas, large turbans, homemade leather shoes called marakib, and eyeglasses. Their watches hang on chains inside their left breast pockets. As they crawled inside the classroom like ancient turtles, their mouths engaged in various activities. One of them sneezes, another coughs, and the third burps. Their hands are constantly moving from pocket to mouth and vice versa. Whenever their hands go into their right pockets, they came out with white napkins the size of bath towels. Then they stop, wipe their faces, and take another step forward. They do this uniformly as if they were military soldiers trained for such work in a military parade. It took the three old religious judges 15 minutes to crawl from the door to their chairs. As soon as the three old men reached their seats, a man came forward and introduced them to the audience. This court of Allah and His Prophet welcomes Maulana Yasin Wad al-Hussein, the main judge of the Sharia court, and his two assistants, Maulana Sharaf al-Din Wad Mamun and Maulana Alamin Wad al-Basir. The audience stood, looked at the three old faces, and then sat down. Then the same presenter announced the purpose of the gathering. "Oh, just Judge, Maulana Yasin, and your assistants, Maulana Sharaf al-Din and Maulana Alamin. Today you have 5 trials to conduct and to impose upon them the judgment of God Almighty and His infallible messenger, the Prophet Muhammad. May God bless him and grant him peace." The chief judge, Maulana Yasin, shouted, "Bring the trial number 1. Fatna, the daughter of Jara al-Nabi or the Prophet's neighbor, presents to you her complaint against Asha Sit al-Banat, or the mistress of the daughters. The citizen Fatna accuses her neighbor Asha of stealing one of her chickens." When Insaf and Deng heard the first case, they thought that they either came to the wrong court or came to a mental institution, and these men and women are crazy and out of their minds, so they say and do ridiculous things. 2 old women came out who looked like witches. Each of them placed her right hand on the Holy Quran and swore by the Book of God that the little red hen was hers. The disputed chicken itself was brought in by a policewoman. Then the 3 old judges whispered for a while and came to a fair decision. Maulana Sharaf al-Din said, "This little red chicken has become the property of the court of God and His messenger." The audience clapped their hands for the fair justice of the Sharia court. Some of them shouted, "Allahu Akbar," and others said, "The truth has come and crushed falsehood." Indeed, falsehood was crushed. The 2 defiant Hag old women protested, but were silenced by threats of flogging and long imprisonment. They were told that if they did not come out, they would be arrested, flogged mercilessly on their buttocks and backs, and then thrown behind bars indefinitely. Maulana Alamin said, "Bring case number 2. Kantashaya bint Koko filed a lawsuit against her neighbor Hafsa bint Alajab because of her gossip against her which she said to Sarah bint Da al-Bait. 3 women came out, and one of them was asked to touch the Book of God with her right hand and swear that the accusation was not true. The woman in question extended her right hand, hit the Holy Quran angrily, and denied the accusation. Case number 2 was dismissed. Maulana Sharaf al-Din shouted, "Bring the trial number 3." Atman Wad Babakar complains against his wife, Halima bint Habibullah, because she ran away from his house and ran to her parents' house. A young man and a young woman in their early 20s, looking like a newly married couple, came out and faced the 3 judges. Maulana Alamin asked the wife, "Why did you leave your Muslim husband's house and flee to your parents' residence?" The girl said while crying, "Because my husband beats me as much as he beats a camel." Maulana Yasin angrily asked, "Why do you hit your wife like you hit an animal?" The young man said frankly, "Because she always refuses to let me have sex with her every day in my bed." Maulana Sharaf al-Din asked in a loud and angry voice, "Why do you refuse to sleep with your husband when he asks for you in bed?" The girl said shyly, "I refused to let him have sex with me when I wasn't in the mood to have fun." The main judge shouted with extreme anger, "What did you say, disobedient wife?" The disobedient wife was terrified and jumped back. Then he shouted, "Listen, man, take this disobedient and stubborn woman to your home, and if she refuses once again to give your penis what God has given you from her vagina, then punish her with your long whip and your thick stick. And if she now refuses to go home with you or runs to her family's house again, come back here." Maulana Yasin said, "We will give you 3 armed policewomen to drag her from her parents' house like an animal and bring her to your house by force." Maulana Sharaf al-Din said seriously, "If she becomes the wife of disobedient and rebellious woman again, lock her inside the house of obedience and beat her day and night with your long whip just like hitting a camel until her demons come out of her head, which is inhabited by goblins." The husband accepted the so-called ruling of God, his infallible prophet Muhammad, grabbed the hand of his rebellious wife, and took her out of the courtroom. 2 armed policewomen escorted the rebellious woman out of the courtroom while she is crying. Then the 2 police officers told her Muslim husband to go ahead of them in a taxi and prepare a small room in his house to lock up his disobedient and rebellious wife in his house of obedience until the demons came out of her haunted head.